to the Bayview Podcast with hosts Andrew Clark and Chris Emery. This is designed to shine on all things life and faith. We hope this serves as a weekly resource and encouragement to you.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Bayview Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew, joined as always by Chris. How are you?
I'm doing very well, man. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good to have you with us here today, and just another episode of hanging out, chatting, talking, and really today hearing some more stories, which we really love when we have the chance to do that. And in fact, because I know there's a lot that I think we're going to tackle, let's just dive right in. Why don't you introduce our guest? Yeah,
today I'm excited that we have I was trying to come up with fun words.
World-renowned?
Yeah, illustrious. the wonderful Tim Manzer, local pastor, and you've kind of done it all. So I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and explain, but we're really glad to have you on today, Tim.
Yeah, give us the 30-second Tim Manzer in a nutshell right now.
Wow. Okay.
No pressure.
I'm that 65-year-old pastor of been married 41 years to Kimberly.
41. Wow.
Got 4 grandkids. I had done a lot of different types of ministry over the years, but for the last 25 years, I've been at New Hope doing pastoral care, counseling, jail chaplain. I worked in the past as a hospice chaplain, worked in the past as a hospital chaplain. I worked as a rock climbing instructor, mountain guide, all sorts of weird things on my resume.
Yeah.
The old senior pastor of New Hope says if he needed a laugh, he would get out my resume. Because there's 2 spots on it where the church terminated me. But still I'm in the ministry. Yes.
Yeah.
And you were at Lake Ann Camp?
I was at Lake Ann Camp. I was the wilderness director. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
I was on staff. They used to have wilderness programming, and I worked for them. And we would take kids on bike trips, and we would also take people up to Wawa, Ontario, and go on the White River and do a week-long canoe trip. You get dropped off by the train and come back in. So I did that for them.
That's awesome.
That's where I met my wife. It was on those trips because she was a counselor at Lake Ann. So we are a 41-year camp romance still going on.
There is hope for those
camp romances. Every once in a while, they go far beyond 5 days.
Yes, absolutely.
How old were you when you met? How old were you guys when you met then?
I was out of college for a few years, so I was 23.
Okay.
And she was still in college. She had a year. She was about to graduate. Yeah. So we met. We actually had met in college, and she thought I was a terrible human being, right?
Yep.
And she was an RA, and I was a person who got kicked out of college. And so we were kind of opposites on that. I went to it's called Cornerstone now. It was called Grand Rapids Baptist.
Yeah.
But literally, I could not get in trouble.
Yeah.
Just, and I wasn't trying. It was just natural at it. And it always just whatever I loved in life, they didn't love, and we would come along, and I just struggled under those kind of things, the legalism, all of that kind of stuff. Just couldn't do it because I was into Christian rock. I really was. I came out of the Jesus People movement.
Okay.
I was a full out. Not a good mix. Between the two, they didn't understand the long hair. They didn't understand the clothing. They didn't understand the. I went to a church called the Barn, which was a hippie church back in the day.
Super cool.
And so I came out of that movement. That's where I was that prodigal that ran from God and ran right into the arms of hippies that loved the Lord. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that story, because I know that that's been kind of that story, or that season has been highlighted with some of the recent, the recent movie, The Jesus Movement, and I think for those of us that weren't there, it was very intriguing. So, what was that Jesus story like for you? How did you find yourself from far from God into that?
It's a crazy story.
Let's go.
All right.
We do crazy.
So my dad was a Baptist minister in the General Association of Regular Baptist Churches. That was the original. I could not get in trouble. I remember him super mad at me one day and said, "Tim, please don't do anything to embarrass this church." That was the point of that.
Yeah.
I was being very, very embarrassing. So I decided, well, I guess that's the one thing I'm good at. And they had a kind of like a checklist.
Yeah.
I'm going to go right down the checklist. Can't smoke, can't drink. I'm just going to can't go to movies, don't like rock music. I'm become a giant rock music fan, And I remember in an argument once with my dad, I said, when I turn 18, I'm going to walk out these doors of this church, flip it off, and walk away. I'm done. And I did it.
Wow.
And I'm not proud of that rebel. I mean, that's where, as a minister, I've had to come into understanding that who I am in Christ and not let Satan say to me, well, if they knew where you've been and what you've done.
Right.
That you were the prodigal that walked. And so I wanted to kind of run away from home. And I was talking to two friends, and they were going on a missionary trip. And they were going to Haiti. And I'm like, tell me about this. And I'm like, whoa. So you can go on a missionary trip and be gone all summer? And I'm like, listening to this. So I started doing research as much as you could back before the internet. And I looked and looked and looked. And what I was looking for was the longest trip anybody had. 2 weeks, nope. Month, nope. No, I don't want that. I want long. And I want, like, let's get out and go.
Yeah.
And I came across this trip that was being put on, and they were actually led by people from California that were part of the Jesus movement out there. And they were doing a work out west, I should have read the fine details. They were doing like church services in the national park and inviting people and working with a translator of an indigenous tongue inside the Grand Canyon. So you'd hike in on Monday to the Grand Canyon to have a Subai branch, and then hike out on Friday and do church services. And stuff. Did it all summer long. It was a terrible plan for a rebel because I met godly Christians that loved the Lord, that prayed in such an unusual way, that read their Bible with such a fervency, a reality to their everyday walk, that had music I'd never heard of. Literally, the worship team, and this is going way back in time, for our training was the band Love Song.
Yeah.
Chuck Gerard, all that. I met him, we were just back, in here, I had only known Amazing Grace, and therefore I went to Aerosmith in my life and love, and whether it's Styx or Kansas. I was that kind of guy.
Yeah.
Bring on the egos, forget church. And suddenly these people related to me in a totally different way. And we were in the Grand Canyon one day, and I just was... just a spirit of repentance had come upon me, and I told my leader that I need to call my parents. Now, this is 1977. I'm inside the Grand Canyon, right? And there is a payphone in the Grand Canyon.
Really?
At that time in history.
That's awesome.
It's at Phantom Ranch. And he says, well, we'll go to Phantom Ranch. So 15 miles away.
Oh, wow.
You have to walk and to make a phone call, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
We walked there. I tell my parents, I'm really sorry. It just really felt like God had gotten a hold of me. And then we walked back the next day, and literally it's 2 days to pull this thing off. And but he felt our leader, and he was such a good godly example. They changed my life. I came up out of the canyon, decided that God was calling me into ministry. The only Bible college I was familiar with the ones that my parents were involved with, Grand Rapids Baptist. I went there, immediately got in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Showing up.
Yeah.
And just could not get in trouble. But I did find a community of likewise individuals outside of town called The Barn, and became part of who they were. And they discipled me. They loved on me. They cared for me. The school literally banned anybody from going to that church.
Really?
But because I was a founding member, they couldn't pull that off. But I kept going. But that was kind of like my come to God and a return to God. I had moments as a child where my faith would deepen, but it would then just never really experience that deep walk with God until that time in my life.
That is so cool. And so how did that look then? How did your parents watch, how that relationship go as far as, you're in the barn, you're growing closer to Jesus, but at the time in a way that was very almost considered outcast from the traditional church settings. Were your parents excited about that, or were they worried about who you were hanging out with?
At that point, I think my parents had gotten to the point that if anybody is influencing him in a positive way, let it happen.
They'll take it. Yeah.
We'll take it. Yeah. Because, I had gone. So I'm the last child in their family that they thought would end up in the ministry.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they're influencing him, if they're loving on him, they're okay with that. I'm not going to go into the full story, but later on, my father got fired as a Baptist minister because of a moral failure, and he never went back into the ministry, and so it was a decision on his part, and actually he came all the way over. He in his well, I'll go right into the moral failure. He was downloading pornography onto his office computer and participating in the office, and it was discovered, and as Baptists would do, they don't restore, at least that group of people, they fire. And he was let go, and he chose to go and become a Lowe's salesman, and he became actually the dad you always dreamed of. Sometimes you need a certain amount of scandal to let it all go.
Yeah. That's actually, I mean, I think that's just another incredible, retelling of the same story of God wants to restore us from our darkest places. And not that I think God, I know God does not desire we go there, but he also sees the opportunities of coming in those moments and freeing us from the darkness, freeing us from our sin, and allowing us to understand. I mean, it's the whole story of the prodigal son, right? That's what that story is all about. We are all that story, and that's the gospel.
Yeah. And it was God who welcomed me back. And I so struggled with the mental battle, even at New Hope Church, where there was something inside of my brain that said, "You're God's disappointment. Look where you've been." And you really cannot serve God out of scandal, or out of embarrassment, or out of shame, or trying to reconcile your past and be a better human now. That's not how God wants us to serve. And I finally got to the point where I had to accept grace. I had to accept forgiveness for myself, and rename myself instead of being God's disappointment. And so it's interesting. The church had sent me to Uganda to check out an orphanage that we wanted to help fund, maybe a project, but we got to see if it was kind of legit. And so I went there, and it was. And then they funded the construction of a school facility there on the orphanage there in Uganda. And then I was sent back for the grand opening, which I'm all about. Parties and celebrations, festivals, and so I would get there, and they're beating drums, and they're dancing, and they're hugging me, and the African name for a white person is Mzungu, and but they're calling me Musumba, and I'm like, what are they calling me? I mean, like, literally, what is this? And they're saying, hey, I said, what? In it's Lugandan, which I don't understand English that well, and so. They say they're saying the shepherd's back, and they're all hugging you. And I said, well, that's going to be my new name. I'm Musumba. Wow. That's my soul name. I'm the shepherd.
What a cool title to carry, to be deemed with.
Yeah.
I think you had that on like a book or some stuff you've done. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that before.
It's on my Facebook thing.
Yep.
Simba Manzer, and like, what is that?
The shepherd.
Sweet.
So you said you've been doing pastoral care at your current church for 25 years,
Yep.
and all the other things you've done with hospital and hospice care and stuff like that. So would you say that that's been kind of the bulk of how God has chosen to use you as in a shepherding role?
Yeah, one by one in a shepherding role. More a very traditional minister in many ways, coming into the home, praying over people, going into the hospital room, being there in the hospice setting. I've also, for the last 27 years, been a volunteer jail chaplain in the Grand Traverse Jail. So I'll go in there over and over and again. I was just there before I left for the UP. My partner his name is Pepe, and Pepe and I went in, and it was the most outrageous chapel last Tuesday ever. A couple of guys have been discipling, have wanted to get baptized, and we set up a baptismal service, and I explained baptism and gave an invitation, and actually 6 guys accepted the Lord last Tuesday in the Grand Traverse Jail. 7 were baptized. We're having a little revival in their stinky little basement down in the Grand Traverse Jail last Tuesday, and I've been part of Keys to Freedom and love that. So it's more those kind of things that I do. Just try to. Seems like I get invited into those settings quite often, whatever they may be, and I'm happy to go there. I have personally spent a little bit of time in jail myself, so I relate well to that. I know what it's like.
I'm guessing that's back pre barn days, right?
Actually, I was in college.
Okay.
And
So have you been invited back to Cornerstone to speak at their chapel?
Never. When I took my first job, which was at Lake Ann Camp, they actually sent a note telling them they made a mistake. Don't hire Tim. I was the unrecommended in person. Like, I thought college was supposed to support you. I have a degree from you guys. Yeah.
I can relate. I spent a fair bit of time on probation at Indiana Wesleyan.
Yeah.
I've never been invited back either. So. I think I'm lucky I got to keep my diploma.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Do you feel like then in that shepherding and the care side of things, like, I don't know, having kind of the radical story that you have in some ways, that the way, Jesus, I mean, you were running and you kind of, like you said, you ran right into his arms.
Yeah.
How has that shaped then how you interact with people, how you see people? Obviously, working in the jails, like there's got to be something in you that's like, I don't know, what's your first interaction with individuals like?
I just feel like they're me. I'm one of them. I don't feel any layer of separation. I don't feel any fear in the jail or anything like that. And the guys, I just. And the gals, I do the ladies' chapels. One of the chaplains that does both, and I just naturally feel comfortable there. Naturally feel one of them. I love jail settings because I believe that the prison setting, there might be locked away for some time, but like me, they might have done something stupid. Yeah. And somebody comes to them and says, "It's okay. Don't identify with what you did or this place. Your future is beyond this place, and there is hope and a life and a future for you." And introducing them to God, oftentimes I'm reintroducing them. I am meeting the prodigals or whatnot in that setting, and oftentimes, and totally relate to that. And I love them. I think you ought to have giant patience, so I do relate to that. Even in the hospital setting, relate deeply. We won't go into this whole story, but the Lord seems to teach me the hard way. So I had that motorcycle accident, busted myself all up, spent a year and 1 month in recovery. And just totally, I say it's the world's most expensive pastor's class. painful. But I was coming back from a wedding rehearsal and on my motorcycle, and a girl read a stop sign at 65 miles an hour, and I T-boned that car without ever putting on my brakes, and came through it, and ended up getting like a compound break of that arm, and broke that arm in 6 places. I got a Steckler prosthetic. It's like a fake arm, but it's on the inside. It still doesn't supinate. Broke my shoulder, broke my sternum rib 1 and 2. It poked through my lung. It caused a heart attack, ruptured my spleen, and crushed my left. Ruptured my bladder, broke my pelvis all up, and crushed my left leg.
Goodness sakes.
Yeah, I was airlifted, and they told one of the other pastors at New Hope Church, stay with Kim. There's no way a person lives like this.
Wow.
And but here I am. I started breathing on my own. Sometime that night, I started to breathe again, and long recovery. But again, I'd been a chaplain that did traumatic intervention, and here I was. And I remember when I could think again, which wasn't right away, and realized where I was at and what had happened, that I came to the thought that, well, you're going to find out the truth, Tim. Your Christianity is either real or it's not.
Sure.
This ICU is going to reveal that.
Yeah. And what year was that? How long ago was that?
That was 2002. So I was 2 years into being employed by New Hope Church when I had that accident.
Goodness sakes. And you were a year, what did you say, a year and 1 day or a year and 1 week?
A year and 1 month in recovery. So I went through a series of surgeries. At a 1 year out mark, I still had a surgery on this hand where they did tendon replacements and put it in a giant halo, where I had to sit still and for a while. But yeah, just like this arm's had 6 different surgeries on it to restore it. And this one's had 3, and then a variety of other different issues. The ruptured bladder was a problem for a while.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you were saying kind of like that extreme patience. Are you saying that kind of correlated with then that I'm assuming that 1 year and month kind of recovery experience of like, is that you feel like the Lord was really teaching you that?
He was, and I remember when I first was, because I couldn't move, couldn't roll over, couldn't sit up. I couldn't feed myself, couldn't wipe my butt. There was nothing I could do for myself other than think. My brain was fine. I didn't have a closed head injury in any way, nor spinal injury, which is totally remarkable at a full speed collision. And so I remember in my darkest time, just laying there. I mean, I was probably a couple months in, and just saying, okay, I give up, God, kill me. Just praying to die. Yeah. And because the pain was too much. And I remember just saying, oh God, this can't be your plan. You know, the big deal is you can't see beyond it. You can't get, you're just, this darkness is in front of you. Yeah. And that's where Psalm 46 became my friend, because I started reading it, but I read it in the entire, the nations raised, all these terrible things. That's what's happening to me right now. And I, and then be still and know that I'm God. And then I fully gave up on visualizing my recovery because it was just too long. And I said, okay, my goal is tomorrow.
Yeah. Wow.
I wanted to walk again. I wanted to run again. I wanted to live a normal life. It wasn't happening. And so I said, well, now my goal is, if they want me to take a step tomorrow with my walker, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And break it down into little tiny victories. And eventually I was up. Yeah. And I actually have run a couple half marathons and few things like that since that time. Wow. Right. But that was an impossible visualization at that point. I had to give up the big picture. Yeah. Just give it up. I give it up, and I'm going to live in the moment and make this day a joyful moment. Otherwise, it was throwing me into a deep depression because the road was so long.
So you say the big picture, you're talking about like the full rescue picture, like all right, God, how are you going to solve this?
Solve this.
Pull me out of this.
Yeah.
Versus, because we I don't know how long ago, a couple years ago, we talked through this concept of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and God's agenda was not to get them out of the fire, but to be in the fire.
Yeah.
And I think I think what you're sharing is a very common thing for a lot of followers of Jesus that are experiencing suffering, which so many are in a lot of different forms. And I think we so often spend the bulk of our time, our passion, and our breath crying for God to pluck us out of the suffering.
Yeah.
Versus saying, okay, God, show me who you are in the suffering.
Yeah. Just receive that day.
Yeah.
Not try to get past it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I even prayed to God, I guess if I never walk again, that's okay. I'm going to still follow you. But still fight as hard as I could in the moment and learn how to, the doctors, the OTs, the PTs, they were all doing incredibly well. And my job was to align that mind that I had with this moment. Another thing I had to learn to do was not focus on myself when I was in PT or because we all have scar stories. And I finally will roll in and win the scar story every time, right? Like, I have 4 fixators, beat that. And on my, but I had to roll in and just want to hear their story because I was in physical therapy so long. I got invited to Munson's physical therapy Christmas party. And then I realized I was the only patient there. And
was it like a petty invite? Or like, were they
like, no, they're like,
one of us now.
You're one of us.
He was in the Secret Santa pool. He was part of the mix.
Yeah, they would push
incredible.
me next to somebody, and they'd nod their head and say, "Hey, like, talk to them, Tim." Yeah, and because. Comparison, if you're doing it correctly, can be a good therapeutic moment where, like, yeah, I'm not so bad. I can do this. And I was that moment for a while. I was a poster child of, it's not so bad. Look at Tim. And
you were the comparison picture.
you could be like Tim. But God. I look back on it, and I honestly feel like I'm talking about somebody else.
Wow.
In every one of these situations.
Yeah.
Whether there's that prodigal, he doesn't exist. And that Tim, it's like it's a story, and it happened, but it's not me anymore. It's not what I'm happening, how I'm living out my life. I have been healed and restored, but, that's a super, super long pathway. And some miracles happen on a very tiny, leensy-beensy inch at a time. That became actually my motto while I was in rehab. Just get your next inch.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was it.
Wow.
Get it. That's the next inch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you... Okay, so then you come to the other side of rehab and all that, and you're kind of got your life back.
Yeah.
So then how do you keep that mentality? Or was it easy to kind of still say, like, this is how I got here? Or were you just right back to, like, all right, let's go?
Yeah. There's another portion of my life that you brought up I'm kind of embarrassed about. One of the things that I did do that I shouldn't have done after my recovery, after I was released to go back to work, is try to spend a lot of time restoring myself into the ministry. I've been gone from my office for a certain amount of time, and I wanted to come back, and I really put a lot of focus into trying to get my job back and doing this and doing this, and I felt like I was running behind. I was lagging behind what the church was doing. I felt a need to kind of catch back up. A certain fear had come in my life, and about then I was approached to start the campus in Bel Air, Michigan. And so I started doing that. I live at Chum's Corners. I am starting a church in Bel Air, right? And I'm going back and forth. In the meantime, I am having surgeries every once in a while still. I'm gaining weight. I'm not taking care of myself. So this was 2002 in the accident. In 2010, I ended up back in Munson Hospital. This crash, 100% my fault. I'm back in the heart center. I'm just out of control blood pressure, heart incident, the whole bit. I think, they're going to check me out. They're going to send me home. They're like, dude, you're staying. I failed their stress test and all of those kind of things. And I had not taken care of myself.
Yeah.
I had not followed forward on the physical therapy after physical therapy had ended. I had become fearful about what I could do as a minister. It caught back up to me. The darkness did.
Yeah.
And so I look at 2010 as another God moment. And I remember the cardiologist came in, and I was like trying to run the campus on my phone and still do all this kind of stuff. And he says to me, Tim, you need to lose some weight. And since that time, I've lost over 50 pounds. And he said, you need to start exercising, start eating right.
Yeah.
And he literally said, stop eating like a teenager, and stop it. And then he said, but you're the problem.
Wow.
You're a preacher, right? Preach to yourself. You have the issue.
Wow.
And he was right. I thought about that. And then I left New Hope for a month. And I actually went to Nepal.
Wow.
Like all good hippies do.
Yeah.
And
There you go.
I was in Kathmandu and up in the eastern Himalayas and all of that. And that's where I came back and said to them, I don't want to do this anymore. Don't want to go to Bel Air. And that's when I came back to the care ministry and back to that place. But learning that I, as a minister, have to have some balance.
Yeah.
I can't go at 100 miles an hour. I can't just neglect my family. I can't neglect my health. I can't neglect. I had done it all. And then after that, that's when I started walking and memorizing scripture and being out there in the woods and returning to the Tim that used to be.
Yeah.
And my biggest model said, I'm going to do less for this church so I can be more. And I just cut it all away.
Good.
And I wasn't striving to prove anything to anybody.
Yeah.
That was my fault.
Yeah.
And there was so much in there that was a mistake. But, as I look back on that since 2010 to now, I feel like, you regained Tim. You regained, Masumba happened after that. Yeah. All of those kind of things happened after that.
That's awesome.
And where I had to change my soul, my mind, my ministry, work life, the whole thing had to stop.
Yeah.
And become something that God could really use without striving.
That's so good. I got to imagine that, our listeners, there's probably a healthy mix of people that are either in the middle of some form of suffering, or maybe they're on the front doorstep of it. They're getting ready to enter into that. What would you go back and say to the young Tim Manzer right before the motorcycle accident, right before the season of suffering and challenge and trial? What would you, knowing what you know now, what would you go back and what encouragement would you give him, saying, hey, this is coming? What would you say to the young Tim Manzer?
Wow. I know we all suffer in so many ways. And I would tell him that God's going to be there with you. I do feel like that my wife loved me back to life. My friends loved me back to life. The friends that I developed during that season were the genuine friends I still hold on to today. Wow. I learned to walk with you, and the community is going to be there. The community of Traverse City was there in a giant way for me. The doctors, the physicians, the healthcare professionals, the OTs. I have great praise for OTs because of the hand issues. The physical therapists, all of them. It's community, and I do think about that point in my life. I kind of expanded away from just the building, and completely afterwards went outside, and started to deepen my love for jail ministry, started to deepen my life for a lot of other different things outside of the facility, and it became much more kingdom-minded, and as opposed to facility-minded, and it made a big difference. But God's going to be with you. He'll never leave you for us. He's going to walk with you. And I do think he had to take me all the way to the darkest point where I'm like, I just want to die, God. I can't ever see anything good happening, ever. and then him little by little revealing light that came back. Yeah.
That's so, I think that's so good. And I don't know, I just felt led to ask that because I believe there's probably some people who are, they're wondering how they're going to get that next inch. How do I gain my next day? How do I gain this next little step? Maybe they're focusing more on the final solution or the full rescue, whereas that might not be what God's going to do today. But I just feel like there's so much discouragement because there's a lot of false versions of the gospel out there, and there's a lot of health and wealth and prosperity gospel being preached where it's painting this lie that following Jesus results in no pain, no trials, no suffering, and that's not the story we know, and that's not the path we know we walk. And I see so many people that go through something not even remotely as deep and challenging as what you went through, and what's on the other side is a heart full of bitterness and disappointment, and God has let me down, he didn't come through, I doubt his faithfulness. And there's just so many of those people, I think, that are out there, they're carrying those wounds, and I think there's just something to be said for the simplicity of what you just shared. It's like, listen, you're not promised understanding. You're not promised for God to give you the plan. You're not promised that it's going to be easy, but you are promised one thing that will never, ever fail. Yep. God will be with you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's so important just to cling to that and not ask for anything else. Mm-hmm. You know, the first Sunday I was back at New Hope Church. So I'm in a wheelchair now. I have to be transported around in a wheelchair. Wow. So accident happened on August 3rd, 2002, and I got back into church just about the beginning of December is when I could actually be transported in a safe way. So I'm coming in a wheelchair, whatnot. Two of the fixators are still on, but the rest are gone. I've gone through a series of surgeries. You know, I've gone through ICU. I've gone through all those different things, and now I could be transported. So Kim gets me there, and I'll never forget to stay. Well, I just cried the whole way through church service, by the way. Just the joy of being back in church and being delighted with that. And then my wife, she's like the friendliest person on the planet. She talks and talks, and so I'm there in a wheelchair, and people are talking to me, and Kim's just off talking to everybody, and then this woman comes up to me and says, "I got a word for God for you, Tim." And she says, "You know, if you had enough faith, you could get up out of this wheelchair today and walk out of this building." And I didn't have the emotional ability to deal with it.
Yeah.
It just crushed me.
Wow.
Theologically, I could argue with her, but this wasn't the point to argue, and I couldn't do it emotionally, physically. I had just achieved going to the first time in church in months, and I get a spiritual rebuke.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think somehow we got to shed ourselves of all of those kind of things that, you know, like if this accident is due to your lack of faith, this sickness is God's judgment upon you, or whatever it was. It's like, it's not like that. We live in a land of suffering. Therefore, we need each other, and we need God. We need safe companions on this. I remember I'm just weeping, but Kim realizes it's different. What's going on? It's not happy weeping, it's sad weeping. Church has turned rejoicing into mourning somehow for me, and I'm back in the okay, what happened, Tim? And then I tell her that, and she wanted to go back in and beat this woman up. And she's got a mean left hand. She played softball, and so I like, don't do that, and don't do that. But we really got to be careful with our words, especially 100%. With the sick. Yeah, that's where I love to go into those settings and not be judgmental. Yeah. Not saying this is your fault. You did this. And I you know, like I accept the blame for what happened in 2010. But that's where God said, okay. And if I had a word to young ministers like you, Andrew, like. Yeah. Keep your life balanced. Don't let it get out of control. It's so easy to spin because life goes on and on and on, and we don't know where to say stop. Especially me, because I have a ministry heart. I have a mercy heart, and I will work until I drop over, and then I'm not any good anymore at that moment. I'm depressed, I'm broken, and I'm hurting. And I've done that crash a few times in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's just so spot on, and I hope that maybe some others need to hear that. Just God will be with you, and I that makes my heart sad that your rejoicing was turned into sorrow with one conversation. And I think of the story of Jesus and the disciples walking down the road, and they come across the lame man, and the disciples were like, "Hey, is he paralyzed because of his parents' sin?" And Jesus is like, no. This is so that my Father will receive the glory. And so that's what we have to always kind of remind ourselves, that the suffering, it's not that God catapults us into suffering just to watch us suffer, but somehow through our difficult time, if we continue to let him be with us and seek him one moment at a time, he's going to use it for his glory.
Amen.
And there's going to come a moment, and I love what you're saying, like, Quit trying to grab the big picture, because I probably even tell people, hey, there will come a time way down the road you'll look back. But that seems like so elusive and almost impossible to imagine. Just in the moment, look for God and how he's with you, because he's there.
Amen.
And he wants to give you encouragement. He wants to give you strength. He wants to give you peace.
Yeah.
He wants to give you joy in the worst moments. If you'll just let him be with you and trust the rest of the picture to him. And I'm not great at that. I'm still learning that journey, but
I just keep thinking of the patience side of things. It's like, when you experience your plan being removed, like I think about that all the time, like with all my dad's stuff and all that, like there was a ton of my life and future and plan tied to all of that. And then when that's removed, it's like, what do I do? And it was such a, like looking back and walking through it, like there's such a reminder there of like your plan might be removed, but God's isn't. And I think that's the part to cling to, which I feel like what you're saying, like God's there. Like it's not like he has stepped out. Like he's got something else he's working on and working with you through. So it's just a good reminder of like, not all is lost, even though it might feel that way in those dark moments.
Yeah. And you didn't want to go there. You don't want to. I'm glad that that God doesn't allow us. I'm glad there isn't Christian fortune tellers, and because I don't want to know. I want to live in this moment right now the best I can. And your dad played a big part in that accident. You know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you were very young at that time, and your dad and I are friends.
Yeah.
And so. When the accident occurred, I was coming back from a wedding rehearsal, and they had to go out to the accident site because what happened to the motorcycle. Because I had the marriage license in there and find the marriage license.
Yeah.
And then your dad did the wedding that night for them, and he also went to Burt's Meat Market because my son was there. Somebody had to go and find him and tell him that I was being airlifted to Traverse City. So you're sorry, but your dad was right there on that moment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Taking over, picking up the pieces. And I think oftentimes we have to do that as ministers. Arrive in the mess and start picking up the pieces and be God in that moment.
That's right.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
That's powerful. So, I know that we really, in a lot of ways, we've only scratched the surface, and certainly want to invite Tim to come back. I'd love to have you back on and keep hearing, because I wanted to talk about how have you navigated, decades of ministry and 25 years even at the same church, which is unheard of. And so we'll have to save some of those questions for next time.
Do you know the sound people at New Hope Church say you should be sent down, Tim, to wherever they make microphones, and you should be the guy that tests them because you're going to break it. And so I want to let you know that I don't believe that I've navigated it all very well, but I have. And at the end of the day, when the dust is clear, I'm still walking in the direction of God.
Amen. Amen. That's so good. So, hey, I hope this was an encouragement to you today. I really do. I know it was for me. So this was a really special time, and thank you, Tim, for sharing and being open and vulnerable. If you're listening and you haven't done so, hit subscribe or like whatever platform you're listening on. That way you never miss an episode, just because there's always God's always got something special for us each and every time we get together. And so we'll be here again next week. Until then, thank you for being with us. It's Tim, it's Andrew, it's Chris. We're out of here, and we'll see you next time around.